Will you pray with me? Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Speak to us now as you have spoken to us throughout the ages. On this glorious Easter, reveal yourself and your will for our lives, that we might live as your Easter people. We seek your face, O Lord. Hear our prayer through Jesus. Amen. Did you follow at all the story of Notre Dame this week? There were incredible stories of heroism from the first responders. Some of them were climbing up the scaffolding on the outside of the building in order to get a better vantage point to fight the fire. Some firefighters went into the burning building in order to try to save the deeply treasured artifacts, and they were able to do so. There was much heroism around the fighting of that fire. One might ask, why would they risk their lives in such ways? The answer, I think, must be found in the fact that Notre Dame represents something. The building took 182-something years to build in the center of Paris. And that was long before the heavy equipment that we're accustomed to seeing on construction sites. To quote from the Friends of Notre Dame website, the cathedral is one of the greatest monuments to Christianity in the world, a place of peace and wonder. The building, designed to stand as an image of heaven itself, speaks a language of beauty and divine authority, they say. In short, I think it speaks to the Spirit of God inside each one of us. When we see beauty, we see God. When we consider things that have lasted through centuries, we feel connected to something that is much greater than ourselves. And this points us again to the eternal God. I know my analogy falls a little short, but allow me a little latitude. For the Jews who followed Jesus, he was like the cathedral at Notre Dame. They saw God in him. He represented something great. He spoke to them with an authority that they had not heard before. His knowledge of the scriptures was deep, deeper than any of the teachers they had ever listened to before. He spoke, and people were captivated. He touched people, and they were healed. He brought peace with him wherever he went. And people did not quite understand. When they looked at him, they saw beauty. When they were near him, they felt somehow connected to something greater than themselves. And many people began to believe that he was indeed the Messiah, the deliverer that they had been waiting so long for. But when Jesus was arrested and put to death, his disciples might have felt the way that people felt as they watched Notre Dame burn. Something important was being lost. They were losing a friend, a beloved teacher, and their hope of being delivered from the Roman Empire. People recognized that he was someone special and that he wasn't easily replaced. They had their own ideas about who he was and what he should do. They believed that he would take his place as the king of Israel and overthrow the cruel Romans, and by doing so restore Israel to its former greatness. His death was devastating to them because it represented a death of their hopes for Israel. But God's plan was so much greater than they could ever have imagined. As we look at this account of Easter morning in John's Gospel, I find myself drawn to Mary. The two disciples move with so much haste, they don't really give us time to catch up with them and what's happening. They run in, they run out, and that really is the extent of their presence in the story. But Mary, she stops to process what is happening. And she allows us a chance to enter the story with her. As she approaches the tomb, Mary still carries with her all the sadness and grief of the crucifixion. She went there to prepare Jesus' body for burial, a final honor that she could give him as an expression of her love and devotion to him. As we read about Jesus' body being missing, we might ask the same questions she must have asked. Where is his body? And why on earth would someone take it away? Why would someone prevent us from paying him this last respect? Perhaps she was angry, thinking they murdered him, and now they've hidden him so that he would also be denied a proper burial. What a cruel thing to do. But as Mary lingers at the empty tomb, she's greeted by two messengers or angels who ask her, why is she crying? I mean, I'd be crying, wouldn't you? But she has a moment to say out loud what she's thinking. They've taken my Lord, and I don't know where they've put his body. As I read it, I can feel the grief in her voice. Would it be so strange to weep over the loss of a dear friend and a beloved teacher? Would it be so strange to weep over the fact that she can't find his body to prepare it for a proper burial? It was grief piled on top of grief. Then she turns out of the tomb and runs into another person asking her, why are you crying? And hope maybe rises in her as she thinks maybe this person has an answer to her questions. She pleads with the man, thinking he's the gardener. Please, just tell me where his body is, and I will take care of him. And then she hears him speak her name. In all her distress, she hadn't been able to see beyond herself until Jesus speaks her name. Can you feel the pregnant pause as she thinks about, why is his voice so familiar to me? And how does he know my name? And then, as she realizes who stands before her, all of her grief melts away. Perhaps now she weeps for joy instead. Her Savior is alive and standing in front of her. Weeping has turned to joy. The morning has finally come. I doubt that Mary fully understood the magnitude of what had happened. For her, the joy was in the fact that her beloved friend and trusted teacher was in fact not dead, but standing quite alive in front of her. She simply wanted to grasp and hug him in relief. How could she possibly have comprehended the full meaning of Jesus' death and resurrection and the impact that that would have on all people for all eternity? We can understand the grief that Mary experienced because we too have lived in sadness. We too have experienced loss, and we have wondered, how do we go on? But in just the way that Jesus asks Mary, why are you weeping? The same question is posed to us. Through the redeeming power of resurrection, the strength has been taken away from all of our loss, all of our grief, all of our sadness. We are no longer lost and alone. We are no longer held by the power of our failures and our shame. We are no longer limited by this life with no hope and no future. Whether the enemy is the Roman Empire or our own selves, or the end of our earthly life, it has already been overcome. So today we celebrate that Jesus is no longer in the tomb. Instead, he has overcome every obstacle, even death. And because Jesus has overcome these things, we can join him in living life to its fullest, knowing that what seems like the end is really only the beginning. So why are you weeping? Amen.